so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is. Well, thank you everyone for being with us for the continuation or part 2 of the theme of the gifts have already been given, but we have to open them. And I hope everybody had a chance this week. Remember at the end last week, I asked everybody kind of be aware. Just pay attention to where your awareness is going. What are you aware of? What are you giving your time and attention to? And I hope you had a chance to do that during the week, because that is of utmost importance. Now, if you're just joining us today and you haven't listened to last week's talk, you really need to do that, because I'm not going to spend too awful much time backing up and restating things. And it's up on YouTube, so you can go to YouTube. If you're listening on the bridge, you can go to YouTube and you can find last week's talk and you can listen to it. But the idea that we were talking about is there are some things that only you can do, for yourself. And you have to do them. Nobody else can do them for you. And it's really up to you. You have to decide that you're going to do them. You have to set your intention that you're going to do them. You're going to have to learn to practice them, I liken it many times to physical exercise. You can go join the gym. You can give them your monthly dues. You can get your little membership card. You can do all those wonderful things. But if you don't go down there and do the techniques, if you don't go down there and lift the weights or walk on a treadmill or ride the bike or swim in the pool or do all the different things, use the tools that are there and that are available for you to exercise your body, you're not going to get any of the benefit out of it. Now, you may feel better about yourself, see. And you remember I mentioned this maybe a month or so ago. William James, when he wrote his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he said that many people undergo religious conversions, and the only thing that changes is they feel better about themselves. Their behavior doesn't change, their lifestyle doesn't change, nothing really changes, but they feel better about themselves. They feel better about themselves. And that's okay, it's a starting point. But we want to move beyond just feeling good about ourselves. We want to actually do the practice. We want to actually exercise our spiritual muscle. So, excuse me, I just was watching something last week and a commercial came up for a remake of Cinderella, the famous fairy tale Cinderella. And I don't know how many times it's been made in cartoon format and in movie format. But once again, we have the story being told and retold. Excuse me while I get a drink. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what is so endearing about that story? You see, why is it that people, for generations now, for generation upon generation, people are so enthralled with this story? That and Prince Charming and all of these other fairy tales. And the theme of these things is that somebody else is going to come along and save us or rescue us or take us out of our situation. Cinderella was treated poorly by her stepmother and step-siblings and made to work hard, but the handsome prince came and took her out of that situation, and she lived as a princess. See, and that's the happy ending. That's the fairy tale, And we are enamored by that. Our culture is enamored by that. It seems like we all kind of identify with having to work too hard and being treated poorly by our colleagues and all of these things. And wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody could just take us away from that? And sometimes if you look at different teachings, the teachings themselves kind of go along that line. They tell people, just do what we tell you to do. Just come to church on Sunday, just put your money in the basket, and everything else will be taken care of. We'll take care of the rest for you. And it's very comforting, it's very comforting when we are part of that. But there's more. You see, there's more. And that's what I'm trying to get to today. I'm not knocking anybody else. I'm saying we're all where we are by right of consciousness. But at some point, I encourage people, say, but could I be doing more? You see, even if somebody else has gone before me and left a message for me, they teach, they give classes, they do all these things. What is my part? What is the part that I need to play? Am I fulfilling my role and my responsibility? And this is why we were talking about the gifts have already been given, see, but we have to open them. We have to open them. We have to do our part. We can't just sit around looking at the boxes with the bows and the wrapping paper on there and say, yippee, yippee, I've got lots of presents. We have to open them. There's something that we need to do. So we were looking a little bit last week at, well, what is it about human beings? What is it about human beings that separates human beings from the rest of creation, as far as we know, in our arrogance, as far as we know. Of course, we're the best, right? As far as we know. But maybe if we figure out what our uniqueness is, then we can understand what our gifts are, what we should be spending time with. When we were doing marketing development and helping people to understand marketing techniques, we say, well, what is your unique selling proposition? What is unique about your business or the way that you conduct your business? Why should a client come to you as opposed to any of your many competitors who are offering similar products and services? And what we're trying to do is to help the entrepreneur start to understand, well, this is my gift. This is my gift, and this is the way that I'm going to give my gift, and this is why it is special. And by focusing on that uniqueness, you see, then they could build a business that was differentiated from the competition. So what is it about human beings that differentiate us from the rest of creation? Why are we here? Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? And we came back to this thing, this thing that eludes us in terms of definition. We can define it, but we don't know what it is. We can define the word, but we don't understand the meaning of the word. We can't really get our mind around this thing called consciousness, which in its simplest definition we might say is awareness. The divine, by whatever name we choose to call it, the divine is, and the divine knows that it is. It is aware. It is aware of all. It is aware of all because it is all. In some techniques of meditation, we get from the Tibetan Buddhists, they have a meditation called the clear light meditation, the blue light of consciousness. This is very interesting to me when I first learned of it, because usually when we start to learn a technique, there are stages. I think that's important to understand, that there are stages. Sometimes we learn things as a beginner that later, as a more accomplished practitioner of whatever it is that we're practicing, we don't think in those terms anymore. We don't do those same things, but they were necessary steps for us in learning the technique. So if you're learning how to play golf, for example, you have to learn stance. So the instructor teaches you how to stand, how to place your feet, where to put your weight on your feet, all of those kind of things. And then grip. How do you hold the clubs? There's a certain way that you place your fingers in your hands. There's a certain way that you hold the club. And different clubs, do you hold different clubs different ways? But you learn grip, you learn stance, you learn grip. And then you learn the swing, And the swing is usually broken down into steps that you have to learn it in terms of steps. The There's a takeaway. How do you take your club back from the ball, and then there's the backswing, and then there's rotate your hips and get into the downswing. You learn all of these different things as separate, like they're separate parts. But once you become accomplished, you no longer think in those separate terms. It becomes one fluid movement. See? It becomes one fluid experience. So when we're learning how to meditate, we typically have an object of meditation. We have something that we bring our attention to. And we do this deliberately. We bring our attention here deliberately because learning how to keep our attention is one of the unique things that we can do, and it is also a requirement. It is also a requirement. If we are to grow, we must be able to pay attention. This is the old joke. We were so poor in my neighborhood, we were too poor to pay attention. But if you think about it, our attention flits everywhere. We are all over the place. We are all over the place every day. We're here, we're there, we're everywhere. And the example I use is, when I was a kid in the Scouts, we learned how to start a fire using a magnifying glass. So all you need is the sun and a magnifying glass, and you can start a fire, assuming you've got something that'll burn. But you'll never start the fire if you don't bring the rays of the sun into focus and hold them there. You can't be moving that magnifying glass all around, all over the place, back and forth, up and down, in focus, out of focus. You have to bring it into focus, and you have to hold it into focus long enough to get the results that you're looking for. Right? So attention, we have to learn how to pay attention if we're going to open the gifts. Because we can't. If we're constantly running around the room and we're picking up this box and shaking it, and that box and shaking it, and another box and shaking it, we're never opening the presence. So when we are learning how to meditate, in the beginning, there is something for us to focus our attention on. Usually it's the breath. Now the teachers have us work with our breath for many reasons. But it is there. It is always there. As long as you're alive on this earth, you're breathing. As I said in the opening treatment, as soon as our little body comes into this world from our mother's womb, down the birth canal, all the liquid squeezed out of our lungs, and our little head pops into this world, and then our chest comes out, and the rib cage expands, and without any thought whatsoever. Our first breath, right? So our life here starts with a breath, and it starts with an inhale, and it ends with an exhale. And we go through life usually not paying any attention to that, to the miracle of the fact that we breathe in, we breathe out, the trees breathe in, the trees breathe out. We are united with them. We are linked to them. What mind created this system? What intelligence created this system? We pay no attention to that. We just take a deep breath and go on. If we're running on the treadmill, maybe then we become aware of our breath. And our heart beating in our throat and all of those kind of things. So the teachers have us just bring our attention to our breath. Bring our attention to our breath. And that's a beginning. Maybe we bring our attention to an object, the flickering of a candle, for example, or a plant, or some other object. But when we are beginning, we need something external to us to serve as a focal point for our attention. But the clear light meditation comes when we no longer need an object to focus upon. It is pure consciousness aware of itself. Pure consciousness, awareness, just aware of the fact that it is aware. Awareness, aware of itself. See? And this we have to go back and kind of figure, because we don't know. We guess, we think, we wonder. This would be the divine mind. See? Pure consciousness, aware of itself. And it created us in its image and likeness. And we have this gift of consciousness, which we may or may not open. We have this awareness. We have this ability to direct our attention. We have the ability to set our intention. But we don't always open those gifts. And what we are contemplating then is, if you look at what makes the human being different than the rest of creation, certainly all of creation is aware to some extent. Even minerals are aware, if you want to consider it at the chemical sense, right? They interact with one another. There's something going on there, you know. The iron knows, not knowing as we would know, but something happens in the iron when it is exposed to water. There's something going on there. There's an intelligence there. And the mystics might say that that's an awareness, you see. That's an intelligence. And it is. What keeps the atoms moving? What keeps the electrons moving? What keeps the protons where they are? All of those things. The mystery that we never kind of think about. But as we look at the different steps of evolution, as we were talking last week, evolution means, in the mystical sense, spirit was involved in matter from the beginning. You hear me say this all the time. The big question in life, did matter create consciousness, or did consciousness create matter? And the mystic would say that consciousness created matter as a form and a vehicle in which to express. And as this spirit that is cloaked in matter, as it evolves towards the full recognition of itself, with each step of evolution, there's a greater degree of intelligence and a greater degree of freedom of movement. So it would seem that if we take that trajectory, if we look at that, it would seem then that as life developed to the human being, to, as Genesis would say, to the being created in our image and likeness, life reached a point where it could become self-aware, not just aware of its environment, not just aware of its surroundings, not just like, you know, a fish being aware when a piece of food floats by. Not that kind of awareness, but an awareness of the self, an awareness of the self, an awareness of I amness. Now at the beginning, remember I said when we begin to meditate, we need something to focus on. We need a focal point. But as we become more experienced, we don't need that, because just being aware is enough. So in the beginning of our journey of self-awareness, we become aware of our self with a little s, our ego self. And we are stuck in this idea that we are separated from everything else, different than everything else, separated from everything else, isolated from everything else, even from our Maker, even from the divine. But we have the ability to open that present of self-awareness a little deeper, you see. Now remember, you're learning how to play golf, you learn stance and grip and swing, and now you're learning your spirituality. You're learning your spiritual nature. And you start with an idea of I am. This idea that I am, and I am separated, different, isolated. And slowly, as we do our techniques, you see this idea of separation leaves us. It leaves us. So we are no longer in our experience, no longer in our consciousness. We are no longer considering ourselves to be totally isolated, insulated, and separated from everyone and everything else. But rather we are all parts of each other, parts of the whole, parts of everything else. Now this brings us to awareness, attention and awareness. That which we give our attention to, we are focused on, and we exclude other things. Right? And I was just helping somebody within the last couple of weeks. I was helping them learn how to ride a motorcycle, and explain to them the importance of awareness versus what's called target fixation. When you are driving a moving vehicle, when you are piloting a moving vehicle, whether it be a plane or a motorcycle or a car or whatever, if you focus your attention on one thing, you're going to go right to it. You're going to go right to it. This is why sometimes people will be going down the highway and they will run right into a police car that's parked on the side of the road with the flashing blue lights. And you say, my goodness, didn't they see those flashing blue lights? They did, but they were focused on them. Their attention was locked on those blue lights and they drove right into them. That's target fixation. So what we want to do when we are learning how to drive defensively is to be aware without being overly focused on one thing. You remember learning how to drive? There was so much going on. There was so much going on. Things coming in, cars in traffic, horns were blowing, people walking across the street. The car was moving. You had your foot on the gas, then you had your foot on the brake. You know, there just seemed to be so much to learn. It was overwhelming at times, and we had to learn to take it one step at a time. You know, put your foot on the brake, put the car in gear, slowly move forward, learn how to stop, you know, learn how to go, learn how to stop, learn how to turn, just one step at a time. But when we become more comfortable with what we're doing, we can develop what is called situational awareness. And in situational awareness, we see the whole. We see the whole and we see everything moving in the whole, but we are not stuck giving our total attention to just one place. Right? So again, in the example of defensive driving, you're driving down the road and a car starts to approach from a road on the right, and there's a stop sign there, you know. Well, you know, if you're looking all around, if you're taking in the whole picture and your eyes are moving and all the things that we were taught in defensive driving, you know they're there and you know what's going on, but you're not stuck looking at them. If suddenly they start to roll and you think, my goodness, they're going to come out of that stop sign, they're going to pull right in front of me, now your attention goes to them and you're focused on them and what's going to happen. You're going to drive right into them. So what we want to do is we don't want to look at them and to the exclusion of all else. We want to be aware. We want to be aware. And then you start to look at your options. You know, what's my way out of this? What can I do? I can slow down. I can swerve to the left. You know, I can swerve to the right, maybe, and go behind them. All of these different things. But the point is that we learn to be aware of the whole without overly focusing on one thing and becoming fixated on it. So when we are first coming into self-awareness, we are fixated on us. We are fixated on the ego us. The I am, whatever your name is. The I am, whatever your job description is. The I am, whatever your marital status is and parental status is. We are target fixated on us. But the divine is not like that, you see. As we start to develop spiritually, we think, well, wait a second, I can either be unique and myself and separated and isolated, or I can be associated with the allness, with the oneness, with the divine, with the bliss of the experience of the mystical. But we don't know how to do both, you see. And this is the meaning of being in the world but not of it. Being in the world but not of it. Doing both. But the divine does both, you see. It is all. It is all that there is. It is all presence, omnipresence. So it experiences itself as the allness, and it experiences itself in the uniqueness of the individuals, the individualized expressions of itself, which is what we are, the individualized expressions of the divine. So our spiritual growth, our spiritual journey then, what we are talking about, opening this present, the present of really discovering through experience that which we are. This is about being aware. Being aware. Not just giving our attention to. Of course, giving our attention to is important, and there's times that we have to do that, and specifically when we're learning how to meditate, how to do that. But that is a technique to help us pay attention so that we can become aware of the whole, aware of the whole. So this is why we learn techniques. Just like I said last week with Harry Lorraine and the memory techniques. The techniques that he taught his students forced them to become originally aware of what was going on around them, what they actually wanted to remember. Because our mind is so flitting, so here, so there, so everywhere, right? The monkey mind or the grasshopper mind that the ancient teachers talked about, it is everywhere. And we have to bring it, for a moment, we have to bring it into directed awareness. And in that moment of forcing that original awareness, the students were able to remember anything they wanted to remember. One of his students was the basketball player Jerry Lucas, and Jerry Lucas became very active in teaching these memory techniques. And he was on Johnny Carson one time, and he used the memory techniques to do something incredible. He memorized every chapter and every verse of the King James Version of the Bible. And he had, I'm pretty sure it was Johnny Carson's show, he had Johnny Carson open the Bible and say, well, Leviticus chapter 1, verse 22, or something like that. And Jerry Lucas could tell him exactly what it was. That was his intention. That was his intention. And he gave his attention to his intention, and he used the techniques, and it worked for him. So what is our intention? I think our intention, as for the purpose of these last two talks, our intention is to become more aware of our responsibility in our own growth. No Prince Charming is going to come. No fairy godmother is going to come to take us any further. Right? Troward said this. We have evolved to the point where our personal evolution can go no further without our conscious cooperation. And what this means is we want to take some time, just like going to the gym. We want to take some time to help develop our attention and our awareness and how to set our intention. So the first and easiest technique that has been taught for thousands of years is awareness of breath. Right? And what I want to say at the very beginning is, when we begin our practice, we confuse the sensation of air passing through our body as breath. And that's all right. That's a good place to start. But that's not breath. See? That's not breath. So you can think, oh yeah, well I felt that, so I'm good to go. I'm paying. No, you're just getting started. You're just getting started. So the awareness of the breath. And as I said in the opening treatment, the awareness, not only the awareness of the breath, but the awareness of the mystical miracle of the breath, of how it connects us with all of life, how the air that we are breathing has been breathed by others before, how the air that we exhale not only goes to the trees, but becomes part of the air that is breathed by all. We are all connected. We are all one, you see. So breath meditation, you can go on the internet, there are thousands and thousands of different teachers that'll teach you different techniques. The Buddha gave this one technique, and he said if you do this one technique, it would be enough to reach enlightenment. And that is simply, and you don't have to breathe any certain way, you don't have to move certain muscles, just be aware of the breath. But we breathe in and we breathe out. And what he says is look for the gap. Look for the gap. There's a point where inhaling stops, there's a gap, and then exhaling starts. There's a point where exhaling stops, and there is a gap, and then inhaling starts. And if you can just sit and be with that, the gap, mind the gap. If you could just sit there and be peaceful with yourself and find those gaps while everything else is going on around you, just like learning how to drive, there's everything else going on around you. The weed whackers are going in the neighborhood, the fire engine's going down the street, but the breath is there, the gap is there, see? Then, once we have been able to do that in our practice in the privacy of our home or our garden or sitting on the bench at the beach or whatever works for us, then what we want to try to do is just as we go through the rest of our day, whatever we're doing the rest of our day, just be aware of the gaps. So you're driving the car and you're doing all the things you need to do to drive the car, but you are also aware of the gaps. Just like I said, the defensive driver is aware of everything that's going on around them. You are now aware of gaps. You're doing your daily routine, but you are aware of the gaps. You are aware. Just this awareness, just this sense of awareness. And we're told if you want to take that a step farther, to be aware of the gaps with devotion, as I said, the mystical miracle of the breathing, the mystical miracle of the breath. As you sit down to eat your food, your lunch, instead of just reading a book and doing work and reading emails and chomping down a sandwich. Mindfulness, can you be aware of what's taking place in your mouth, in your stomach? How does the esophagus even work? That the food goes down, you see. Be aware. So what we want to do is we want to bring our awareness to not just focus on the daily, focus on the routine, but we want to, in that moment, we want to be aware that this is a spiritual being. This is a spiritual being. Aware, observing, participating. So as we start to develop our powers of awareness, our powers of our ability to pay attention, then we can start to keep our mind on the things we want and off of the things we want. So you remember I said a few weeks ago that Carl Jung was telling us that the conscious mind, the conscious part of the self that he called the ego, cannot directly know the subconscious part, but can know the subconscious part from the symbols of the dreams. Well, now we want to consider that it is done unto us according to our belief, but we don't know what we believe. Now, consciously, I can maybe think about ideas and I can work in my intellect and kind of come up with a list of things and say, well, this I believe, sort of like the Apostles' Creed, my own personal Apostles' Creed. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. You see, that's just the 10% of which we are aware. 90% of what we believe, if you go back to the model I mentioned last week, 90% of what we believe is believed in our hearts, is believed below our level of consciousness. So working with the 10% is good, but what are you going to do about the other 90%? So one way to become aware of what the 90% believes, if you take as your starting place the premise, it is done unto you according to your belief, then you can look and observe at the conditions of your life. And you can ask yourself, what would a person have to believe in order for this to be true? What would a person have to believe in order for this to be true? One of my teachers in Durham one time gave a talk, and she said that she had traveled around the world, and what she realized was in all of the different cultures that she visited, that the people were living their idea of God. Their life was a reflection of their innermost beliefs, And I got that a little bit when Lori and I went on a cruise in the late, I guess it was 99, we went on a cruise. And we were pulling out of a port in Italy. It was kind of a stormy day. And we were pulling out of this port. And as we were leaving the port, at the very end of the jetty, they had a statue of, I assume it was St. Elmo, the patron saint of sailors, who was the statue's hand was raised in a blessing, and the ship was pulling out. And they put that there so that the sailors would be aware, they would be aware that St. Elmo was with them, that they were under the protection of St. Elmo. They were living their religion. As they understood it, as they lived it, they were living their religion. We are all living our idea of God. We are all out picturing our idea of God. Now herein we kind of can get into a struggle, because we look at a condition in our life and say, well, I'm constantly experiencing insufficiency. I'm constantly experiencing lack or limitation in some form. And what am I believing? What are my thoughts? What am I doing in order to create that in my life? You see? And this is what I call metaphysical guilt. Dr. Holmes tells us you are never going to figure out. There's not ever just one thing that you're thinking. So we may have picked up these ideas from psychoanalysis, from psychiatry, that we can go back, way back in time, and we can find a particular incident in our childhood where we were exposed to some type of a trauma, and as a result of that, our life was lived a certain way thereafter. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about doing that. All we're talking about doing is being aware. Just being aware. The gifts have already been given, you see. Abundance has already been given. Supply takes whatever form it needs to show up in our lives. That's already been given. So if we are not experiencing the enough and plenty that we would like to experience in our life, well, then we've got to figure out how to open that present, you see. Then we have to figure out what we need to do. So the first step, and I think I'm going to close around here right now so we can pick this up next week and go deeper into the technique of how we address our underlying beliefs. But the first step is awareness. It's kind of like the 12-step program, The first thing people in the 12-step programs have to do is they have to admit they have a problem, right? As long as they're staying in denial, there's nothing that can be done. So what we want to do is we want to become aware of the life that we are living. See, maybe up until now we have been living it kind of autonomously, doing things automatically, taking things as they come, not paying much attention, flitting from here to there to everywhere. But now we start to realize that we have this great gift. We have the gift of being able to pay attention. And we have the gift of being aware. And we have the gift of setting our intention. Setting our intention. It is done unto you according to your belief. Well, what's your intention? You can become aware of your belief because you can observe the outpicturing in your life. But now, can you set your intention to change that belief? So we're going to pick up next week with how do I set my intention? How do I change my beliefs? How do I participate in life the way that life has been set up? The Buddhists say the game started before we got here. We're just trying to figure out the rules so we know how to play. How do we participate in life according to the way it's set up? And what is it we are really, really trying to have? Is it more stuff? Are we trying to use God as an ATM machine by setting our intention for more and plenty? Or is there something even deeper than that, you see? So let's pick this up next week with setting our intention, changing our unconscious beliefs, opening that gift of consciousness that we have been given, opening that gift of self-awareness that we have been given, opening that gift of will and choice and volition that we have been given, and setting loose the greatest gift of all, the power that responds to us according to our belief. Next week. And so it is.